that was the type of song Swami, he wrote dozens of them, much like that, carrying a very similar message. And in this one, obviously the message was what we need, you and I, as individuals, is love. But I think we're speaking something larger today. What this world needs is love, because we're not going to drive out the hate. Is unless we bring the light into what it is we're doing. It's said in the Bhagavad Gita that we go to that which we worship. And what does it mean when we worship something? We think of worship as when we go to temple, we'd offer puja, we do outward sorts of things, but the inner worship is that upon which we place our attention. Our heart is engaged. Naturally, when we worship in a formal way, as our heart should be at least, it should be engaged upon God, it should be upon that which we're worshiping. But in the larger sense, whatever it is in our life that we place our attention upon, we draw that to ourselves. And what Krishna says is we go to that which we worship. And think about this. What during the day is it that we're worshiping? Yeah, I hope it's God sometimes, but certainly I doubt if it is all the time. We worship many things in life. The banker perhaps worships money. You say the school teacher, perhaps he worships knowledge. Maybe that's a little better. The craftsman perhaps worships his tools. All of us are worshiping something. It depends where our attention is placed. And that to which we worship, we will draw the fruits of that into our life. And I think also, just as individuals worship individually, we as a society also worship. You can tell quite a bit about a society depending upon who are the heroes of that society. Who do we worship? I know I come from America, and of course when I was a young man in the 1950s at that time, and honestly, I did not worship God. To me, God was a very famous baseball player. How many people worship Sachin? We put to that which we worship when we give our attention. Well, you can also see to who do we as a society, America, here we have in India, who are our heroes? Who do we admire? And it tells us a lot about our culture, about us individually. And we've been seeing over the last 50 years, perhaps 100 years, maybe the last century, 20th century was a very, very interesting, I emphasize that word, interesting century. There's a saying, I've been told that it's a Chinese saying, that goes, may you be born in interesting times. And most of us here, I think, were born, we may have a few young ones here, but most of us were born in that 20th century, which I would say is interesting times. And even now, we find that we're in very interesting times. Now that can be taken as a blessing, may you be born in interesting times, but it can also be taken as a curse as well, because interesting times might mean many different things. And I think if we look back on the last century, and perhaps even if we look into our own time now, we see that this is a very interesting time. It's particularly a time of change. And I think that change is also accelerating. It certainly seems that to me, although I think as people get older, it seems like life is accelerating very quickly. But I do think most of us would agree that things are very quickly moving forward at a rapid pace. I would like to I know just a few weeks ago I did something that I would like to see a show of hands of how many of you did this as well. I received, and I wrote back a letter to a friend. I wrote it longhand, I put it in an envelope, and I put a stamp on it, and I mailed it. Now, as I did that, I realized I don't think I've done this in a year or two. How many people send letters longhand written with a stamped letter? What do we use now? Email. How many sent a stamped letter to a friend? Not business, not business. Sometimes we have to send a check or something similar. But a letter, and not an invitation, because of course invitations to marriage, you have to send those. You know, okay, or you have, but just a regular letter. How many sent a letter recently? Nobody? There's one. Now let me ask the other question. How many sent an email? I think right. I think you get the point. Well, some of you are young enough to not have been born into an age when there was no email. But I see lots of us who came of age before email, and we would write letters regularly, but we don't do that anymore. It's just a simple outward expression of how the world is changing. We used, when Ananda Sangha began in the 1960s, we had on a piece of property, it was in the countryside, we had a piece of property and we had maybe 100 people living there. We had one telephone. Unthinkable today, unthinkable. The rickshaw wala has a telephone. He has a mobile. It's unthinkable. Now, it's common. Well, this is the quickness that we see, and it seems to be accelerating. It seems to be going faster. And actually, I think that's not just a subjective opinion. It's actually true. And he's going to get me my glass. Oh, I thought you were. That's even better. That's even better, thank you. I think it is accelerating. Actually, this is something that the great masters of our path said is actually true. They said we are living in an age where change is rapidly accelerating because greater energy is coming into this world. And this age that we're living in now is experiencing change very rapidly. But when change happens, what do we feel when that change happens? If you find something in your own personal life, suddenly something has changed. It's been my observation. Sometimes that's welcome. More often, the reaction is, oh no, something's changed. We usually, the human condition, reacts to change negatively. People don't want change. We sometimes say we do, but when it really happens to us, we tend to resist that change. And when, just as in the physical world, when something begins to change, perhaps a bar, you begin to bend that bar, something happens. Tension happens. Resistance happens. And it begins to build up stress in whatever it is that is being asked to change. This happens in material. It happens in us, in our individual life. But particularly, it's happening now with society as a whole. Society very rapidly is changing when we are beginning to see the stresses of that. You look in the physical world and you say, yes, look at the change that's happening. global warming is happening. When you have stress, something wants to change, that stress manifests itself as resistance, reaction. You're seeing this, I believe you're seeing this played out in social forms. Societies are being put under pressure, asking to change, and if they can keep up with that change gracefully, it happens in a, you might say, a more or less harmonious manner. But if societies cannot make that change gracefully, you find violence, you find upheaval, you find terrorism. And you see this happening right now also throughout the world, some parts of the world perhaps more than others, because they're not able to adapt to the changes, not of their own making necessarily. There's something in the universe, you might say, that is moving, that we have to adapt ourselves to. But you take it even more personally, this change. We look about the society and we see that social conditions are changing. We see that values are changing. Traditions are being passed up, perhaps, going by the wayside. So change doesn't necessarily mean good or bad. But it's been my observation that if you're older, you're less likely to embrace change. I remember, and if you're younger, some of you, I think you're more adaptable to change because you haven't been set in your ways quite so much. You don't look back. I know when I was a young man, it was always, I vowed I would not become like this. When you get older, you say, oh, when I was young, things were, you fill in the blank, X, Y, Z. And that's it, oh, when you know, that the good old days, as we would say in America, in the good old days, things were this way. And these young people nowadays, they just don't know how to behave. And I said, Lord, don't let me become like that. Because it's every generation does that to some degree. But nevertheless, there's also truth to that as well. That society, our society, is being forced to change. Now, an interesting thing in these changes that we're being subjected to, at the same time, years ago, when it took me a week to send my letter, or 2 weeks to send my letter from America to India, these changes could be isolated. What happened over here in India, you know it, it's far away, out of sight, out of mind. What happened in some other country didn't affect me too much. I knew little about it. But now, with the internet, it's instantaneous. So what does that mean? We've become those villages that were isolated one from the other are no longer so isolated. We've now become, as some people say, a global village. What's happened is, instead of an isolated world of many small countries, each competing, striving, individually not connected with others, we now find that we're interlinked. And what happens in one country is affecting everybody. And so we've become a global village. And you find that there's a certain unity that happens to that, a common understanding that happens to that, but that too has stresses and strains to it. So I don't think let me say, I'm not about to say what is particularly good or what is bad about change, but I hope we can all agree that change is happening. It is happening. It is happening quickly, and it's a fact of life. And I think we have to look into the future of where that change is taking us, and particularly, how are we going to be able to adapt to that change? Change can happen, it's going to happen. Do we find ourselves like the old, when the monsoon comes, the high winds come, What happens to the old trees? They go over. What happens to the young trees? They simply bend and they come back. And that's how we want to be as well. We have to be able to stand up and to be able to bend and right ourselves when change happens, and to be flexible, to be able to adapt to it. But we want to be able to adapt in a positive way. We want to meet change head on and not resist it or not react to it in a way that we're seeing in some parts of the world today. We don't want change is going to come, but how do we respond to it, let me say, rather than react to it? Reaction is never a good thing. Response is appropriate. And I think this applies to each one of us in our personal life. All of us, excuse me, all of us are subjected to change. And I think if we're going to ask our society, whatever country we come from, because we live in one society now, I think, a global society, if we're going to ask our society to change and respond into the future, it has to begin by each one of us also knowing how to change in our own lives and how to respond to lives. And you have two basic approaches in life. You have people who react to what happens to them, and you have people who respond to what happens to them in life. And there is an essential difference between reaction and response. Reaction is something that is ingrained in us according to our habits. You could say it's that more primitive side of the brain, the animal side of the brain, fear, flight, hunger, aggression, these sorts of things. Something happens and we react without even thinking. Just yesterday morning, I was picking up something and I dropped it. I lost the handle on something, and my other hand, without even thinking, caught it. Now I thought that was interesting. I didn't think about that. My hand just caught it without thinking. Well, something was ingrained in me. But we see in life, many things are ingrained and we react when change happens. When somebody says something angry toward you, what do? When and this can happen, even every day we drive on the road, somebody cuts across, we react, we don't respond. And if we take this into our personal life, people behave in ways that are very primitive. And for us as individuals to be successful in life, to be happy in life, you could say the essence of becoming spiritually mature, to become, perhaps you would like to say, from becoming a child to an adult, but I can't necessarily say all adults learn this lesson, is learning to not react, but to respond appropriately to what happens. And when we respond, we're engaging something. We're engaging our free will. We're engaging the ability to make a choice. I can act this way. I can act that way. That's response. And until each of us as individuals can become responsive, how can we expect society itself as a world environment to learn to respond to situations rather than simply to react to situations? Well, this is what we're seeing today, is we're seeing an effort to be able to uplift and to respond appropriately. And this second song that we sang for you, what we need is light to drive out the darkness. That song, Swami labeled, or he titled that song, Devil Worship, Because most people, they worship the darkness. They don't allow themselves to respond appropriately. They don't learn the basic lessons of how to do that. So we're seeing this change happening, and I'd like to just mention a couple of particular trends that I have noticed of what's happening in the world today. And I want to introduce, because we're here today to honor the life of Paramahansa Yogananda on his birthday, which was a few days ago. And what he brought into the world to respond to those changes, asking us to respond to them. And a couple of the things that are particularly strike me, and that Yogananda, his message, resonates to respond to, are these. I've noticed in many people, and I try, if I see this in myself, to catch it, because I don't care for it. But there is a general attitude among some in society of a negative pessimism. Everybody in this world's corrupt. Don't you see? You read the newspaper. You read the newspaper, and it gives that impression. Everybody's corrupt. Everybody's, it's not going to work. The world is going downhill. It's going down the drain. Everybody's polluting that country. Which one's doing it more? And there's a certain approach to life that is very pessimistic. And because everybody is corrupt, what is the message? Well, I might as well be corrupt too. Therefore, what does it matter? What does it matter if I, overcharge a little bit here, take a little bit under there? It doesn't matter, because everybody is that way. And there's a tendency to be of pessimism, which is actually something that we have to look at in our own life. I'm expressing it in outward forms ideas that people have. But I have a friend, no names released, but it was a very, very negative sort, had always seen problems. It's terrible. Everything's a problem. This isn't going to work. That's not going to work. This is bad. That's bad. Why did people do that? This person happens to be a foreigner. He came to visit India. He said, why do the Indians do that? If they would only XYZ, they would be much better off. I don't like this. I don't like this. Of course, foreign travelers are that way, no matter what country they go to. But people who are that way, and we should catch ourselves. The habit to see life as a series of problems, whatever our social situation, is debilitating to our spiritual progress. We need to take that tendency and to look instead for solutions. If you see a problem, we have where I came of age in Ananda, back in America, we had a tradition that if you were going to point out a problem, you were obligated to also point out a possible solution. And what is the difference between a problem, looking at a problem, what's not going to work, versus looking at a solution from a yogic point of view? Looking for a solution is looking toward the light. What we need is light. Looking toward a problem only is looking to the darkness. Now, this does not mean that we don't have to recognize a problem when it's there. We have to see it. But we see it, and then we have to do something about it, and that demands a possible solution. So it's necessary to look to the light, and if we can, as a society, start to mutually look for solutions in life, very well off, and less concentrating and stopping at the problems. Now, the second thing I've noticed is because everybody's corrupt, and because the world is going down, there's a certain temptation to solve that by displacing the past, throwing out tradition, throwing out establishment, and being destructive in the process. And what we're seeing in the world today, this is called, philosophically, this is called nihilism. This nihilistic approach is what you're seeing these fellows in the Islamic State. It's very nihilistic, that sort of thing. But I don't want to limit it to that, because it would be too convenient just to place that on one group who's, I feel, very misguided. We see that mindset. It's the mindset. Because I suspect you remove those fellows, and that mindset is going to find its expression elsewhere. If there's not meaning in people's life, if there's not a directional willingness in groups or in individuals to go toward the light, towards solutions. And the third element that I would say let us be aware of in the world today, that I think is having a foundational negative impact, is, it's easy to say materialism, but I mean this in a very specific way. And it's, you could say it's called scientific materialism, which is, this world is nothing but matter. Matter is the fundamental reality of this world. I don't think many of you hold that thought, but in some ways it's there, and it's influencing the world at large. Consciousness is merely a function of the brain, the physical brain. It's merely something of an illusion that something higher than physical matter itself exists. And this is a very insidious approach to reality, that there's nothing underlying this physical reality. So consequently, if there's no underlying reality, there's no meaning. There's no meaning to life. There's no direction to life. Once you die, it's gone. Why worry about it? Why not enjoy, be merry right now? And you find this lack of meaning in society, and this leads to many different consequences that are causing great stress. But all of these, and there are many more, you could make your three and share those perhaps. But it was in response to this type of thinking that has come as perhaps as a reaction to the change of ages that we find ourselves in right now, that Paramahansa Yogananda came into this world to offer solutions. He offered solutions, and he came with a message that was appropriate for this age. It's said that the great ones, every age, you could say, has its challenges. There's not going to be any age that doesn't. That's the nature of life, challenges, nature of our individual life as well. So in a sense, when things go wrong, it's just a challenge. Yogananda used to say, remember, conditions are always neutral. They're not good or bad. They're only good or bad to the extent that you make them. You think of them as good or bad. They're simply challenges that you have to deal with. And so consequently, this world too is being challenged. But he came. Every age has its own particular challenges. And this is why the great ones come again and again throughout the ages to bring a particular expression of the ancient teachings that are eternal. Sanatana Dharma is eternal, but it has to be expressed new, appropriate to the situation in every age. And it comes again and again. And those that bring that Sanatana Dharma into new expression are the saints. It's the saints who come in and who have that direct perception of truth, because truth is truth. And so it was that Paramahansa Yogananda came into the world with a particular mission. He was chosen by his gurus. His guru's guru, actually. His guru's Paramguru chose Yogananda. And if you have read the autobiography of a yogi, you'll remember that chapter where the great Mahavatar Babaji reveals to him that he had been chosen by him and sent to Sri Yukteswar Yogananda's guru to be trained and for a special mission. Now that mission, in his case, was to take these teachings out. Now, many people think, and I know this is a common thought of people in India, that Yogananda's mission was to go to America. Not a wrong impression, but an incomplete impression. His mission was to go to the world. But he had to go somewhere, and it happened to be at a particular time in history when America represented something. And his mission would have not been the world mission that it was if he would have stayed in Calcutta. It wouldn't have reached the world. His mission was to reach the world as this world was coming into a new age. And remember, this was at the beginning of the 20th century when these changes were starting to accelerate greatly. He came into the world with a particular mission, and he was foredestined and told, not by his will. I'm sure Yogananda would have been happy to stay where he was, in Ranchi perhaps at that time. But he knew, he had been told, he knew what his mission was. And so he was trained to go to the West with a particular mission to reach out to the world at a time when the masters had known that this world was going to become a global village. It was going to become a one world, no longer multiple small worlds. And in that one world, the teachings in one country would blend with the teachings of other countries. The message, we would all be in this situation together. And so he went into that to infuse society and the world consciousness with particular responses to those challenges that I mentioned. This world is matter. There's no deeper reality to that. Now, of course, in India, that isn't believed to the extent that it might be. You go to Europe, that's dogma. That's dogma. In England, UK, Germany, those places like that, that's dogma. But America, yes, but less so. But nevertheless, the idea that this world is matter is held universally, whether you're in the UK, Germany, America, or in Delhi at the IIT. Well, this world is matter. We have IIT people here? No? Okay. That I gave a discourse a few months ago in Bombay, and it was we veered into this very subject, and I could tell that they were skeptical. Consciousness is a function of brain, is simply a brain function, and we discussed. I I think I made a good argument to them. But this is the argument that Yogananda made when he went to the West. And this is the ancient tradition of yoga, of the Vedas, that no, consciousness is the basis of this world. Behind matter, and the scientists are even recognizing and admitting this. Behind matter, what is there? What does MC squared equal? Energy. Everybody knows this now. I mean, it should. Everybody knows this now. You come out of school. Of course, well, matter is equivalent to, it's another form of energy. Well, that was 100 years ago. This has come to be recognized now. But somehow science has not yet incorporated fully the implications of that. And what Yogananda came for was to take it one step further. He says, yes, energy. We're energy, we're not matter. But we're something more than that. We're consciousness. Consciousness is behind energy. And he predicted that the day will come, perhaps not so far in the future, when this will come to be recognized as the reality. That whether this body comes, this body goes, but that consciousness remains. And that is our basic nature. And then we are but expressions of that. We're vessels that hold that consciousness for a time, and then it passes. But the consciousness, the body, the vessel passes, but not the consciousness. And so, if we can understand this, Yogananda came to see that there is a deeper meaning to life. It doesn't come and go and annihilate. And this has deep implications. If we see that there is meaning in life, we can recognize that there is also a direction. A direction. We're moving in a direction as a society, but also as individuals. We're moving as individuals towards something. We're moving toward that light. And that dichotomy between light and darkness is a very essential. Whenever we have a happy thought, there's an upward movement of light. There's an upward movement toward light. As the yogis would explain, whenever we have a happy thought, there's actually an upward movement of life force within the body itself. When we have an angry thought, there's a negative downward flow. And this up and down, this essential dichotomy is something that if we think there's a purpose and a direction, why not move our whole life? What can I do to move my life in that direction? And we find that if we move in an upward direction, toward a positive direction, toward a meaningful direction, we gain something very precious that every one of us wants. We're happier. We're more satisfied. There's fulfillment. We understand on some intuitive level what the meaning of life is. Because this was the second thing that Paramahansa Yogananda brought in his message. One, that there is meaning in life, that there is this physical world is not the end all and be all. There's something more than that. But he also brought something that, let me define it in this way. He brought methods by which we can actualize that. Yes, it's fine to know about meaning, but is it just one more belief that I substitute for all the other beliefs that I have? He brought a principle that Swami Kriyananda used to embody in these words. He said, yes, you have many beliefs, but you have to test it. Beliefs are only that, unless you make them real for yourself. Oh, I'm losing it. My sartorial guru there. We have to make them real for ourselves through our own practical application and experience. And Swami Kriyananda said, everybody needs to test these things for themselves. There's people say many things. The earth is flat. People said 500 years ago. People say many things about religion as well. How do you know? Even in daily life, should you buy this grocery or that vegetable or that one? How do you know? And what Swamiji said was, he said, test it. Use the phrase, and when you're doing something in life, does it work? Does it work? And he said we need to use that concept for our religion as well, for what we do in life, for the choices that we make in life. Because all of us, I hope, are making choices. That's the nature of becoming conscious and not reactive. To respond is to actually make choices in life. But being able to make choices implies a certain degree of higher consciousness. That's what makes us human as opposed to the animals. Does not mean that we're making wise choices. That's the second part. People make many choices, but are they wise choices? And how do we know if something is a choice? Swamiji's, I think, words apply. Does it work? That's the final test. I've noticed this with philosophers. Philosophers like to talk theory, but they never ask the question, does their theory work? And I think you see this in social theory as well. You see it in what's going on in the world today with their so-called solutions. You have to ask, does it work? And what do we mean when we say, does it work? And for us in our individual life, we have to say, are you happy? Is the choices that you're making going to make you more successful and fulfilled? Not just necessarily, success isn't how much is in your bank account. It's in your, what is it, Bhutan, that has the gross happiness measure. It's how happy and fulfilled we are in life. And this is, we have to ask ourselves, does it work? Does it make us more happy? Does it make us a better person? Does it make our heart open? Does it make us kinder? Does it make us, all of you, think about those things that makes you fulfilled? This is what has to be asked. And we have to not only ask this in terms of our individual actions and choices, but we have to ask it as a society as well, and we individually, we also have to ask it of our religion. We can inherit things from the past, but what part of it from the past makes it work? If our religion is not making us a better person, I have to question whether it's truly a religion, a right religion. And we have to look, is it making somebody better? And what is better? Is it making their heart expand? Is it making them more embracive of other people's realities? Are they sympathetic? Are they kind? Are they nice people? And this is how we have to measure. And so Yogananda brought that question. He brought, yes, this world there's something more to this world than this outer reality. But he also brought tools to be able to answer that question for ourselves. Does it work? And this is what we, in this modern age of science, this modern age of we think of it as very advanced, but probably it's not. But we have to ask ourselves, how can I test? And this is what Yogananda brought. He brought tools into this age that people could test for themselves. Is this valuable, appropriate to this age? And so he brought the tools of yoga. He brought specifically the tools of meditation, of Kriya Yoga, that were given to him by his guru and to be passed on. And he also showed how can you use these principles, which it was more the yogic principles in the broad sense. How can you use these principles to make your life better in business, family life, education, every aspect of life? How can you practically apply these? And this was Yogananda's purpose for going out into the world, to introduce these principles on a worldwide scale. And his life was dedicated to that. And you could see that what he did was to plant seeds. He was you could say a farmer in that regard. In springtime, he planted the seeds. But in time, these seeds come up. And those people who follow him in the years, decades, centuries in the future, it's for them to cultivate those seeds. And Swami Kriyananda, he dedicated his life to cultivating those seeds and to bringing them up. And so he wrote 150 books, and even his music songs do that to some degree, to bring that message out into the world that we are actually entering in, and this is what Paramahansa Yogananda said, we are entering into a very beautiful age that's coming. But he said, this period of time, and he didn't specify how long that period was, but we're talking long rhythm. He said, the world itself will go through a period of change. It has to. Because as we move from an old way of thinking into a new way of thinking, we have to discard the past and we have to find new forms. But the one truth, that Sanatana Dharma, remains the same. And as we go through that period, it may be a little disruptive, but he promised that we're moving into a higher age, a higher time, when the world itself will live in harmony. But first, the world has to see itself as one world. That may take a little time, but as we do that, then from that time we'll begin to see the interconnectedness of people from every country, one with another, and we'll come to an understanding that there are basic realities, basic religion, you could say, that unites people in every world. And he was sent to the West, through which he would then reach out into the world at large with this message of Kriya Yoga, specifically as a technique, but more than a technique, a message of yoga that would be a foundation of direct experience. Each individual in their own life must take the responsibility of having their own direct perception of divinity within themselves. He made a very strong point. He says, we have gone beyond the age where belief alone can sustain us. We now must build a new foundation, built upon our own inner perception. And this is the responsibility of each of us, to inwardly perceive divinity within ourselves. And people will then, if they have that perception, will realize that we are not separated, one person from another. We are united as brothers and sisters of the one true Heavenly Father. That's what will come about his prediction was in the age ahead, as we move into the centuries ahead. Now, we here and around the world represent a fraction, a small fraction, very small fraction actually, of people who may think this and who feel this way. But do not underestimate the power of a few people who believe strongly in good, a few people who believe strongly in positive solutions as opposed to negativity, a few people who believe in truth, who reject the idea of, oh, this whole world's corrupt and I'm going to reject it. We cannot do that. If we do that, we're relinquishing our responsibility to be instruments for these teachings that the great ones have passed down. And we relinquish our responsibility for those of us who feel inclined toward this particular path, but any path. We relinquish our responsibility to each one be a light in the middle of darkness. That light in darkness is hope. Hope is the light shining in darkness. And we have to light it to flame, make it brilliant, so that other people will also be inspired by that hope. But we must then take the next step, because hope itself must be brought into action itself. And each of us have a responsibility, I feel, to take that hope, that message, that spark of believing in light over darkness and expressing it in our lives and sharing it with others. I think this is necessary. You'll find that if you share something, you become an instrument of that. And you yourself are the beneficiary. If you take something that you enjoy tremendously and you go into your room and personally just enjoy it all by yourself, it's enjoyable. But isn't it much more natural if you have something really you enjoy, you follow the impulse of your heart, which is to, I love this so much, I want to share it with everybody. And then you become an instrument for whatever it was. And not only that, all those others enjoy it too, and they too will want to share it. It's like Facebook, you might say, I like it, and then more and more people like it. Funny how the modern world has taken over our way of looking at things. But there's a truth to this. And so each of us have a choice. We have a choice every day in the little things we do. Let us become expressions of the values that we cherish. If you believe in something strongly in the heart, you owe it to yourself to put that into action. Express that which you want the world itself to become. And then we play our role in this. But in order for us to share something with others, we must first possess it also ourselves. So if we want to share goodwill, kindness, peace, calmness, whatever it might be, if we want to share that, we have to do that ourselves. We have to make that our reality. And the great ones, Yogananda Ji, all the great ones, all traditions, this is why they come again and again. That light shines through the great saints, age after age after age. But we look to them, as Yogananda would say, Swami Kriyananda said many times, he said, Yogananda did not come to this world to show us how great he was. He came to show us how great we could be. And that's why all the great ones and all the saints come, age after age after age. Thank you very much for hosting us today. Perhaps next time I'll have a little better voice.
You started to change. Then you talked about response and reaction. Then you said that if we can become a better person, and whatever idea have been conveyed to us, if we can implement in our own lives, we can communicate to others. That is the message you have. Thank you very much.
Yes, that wasn't so much a question, but it was very much a truth. That if we can learn to express these and realize these in our own heart, we can then begin to share those and communicate those others. Thank you. That's very true.
There's another question.
Hello sir, my name is Ravi. I have a specific question related to objectivist philosophy about people who are working towards their selfish goals and who are creators in this world, who are sort of prime movers of this world. For example, it may not be the best example, but somebody who came up with the concept of the wheelchair must have sort of did it because his wife always yells at him that, you have to come back early home, you can't keep lifting people and take 10 hours to, ensure that they reach out to their destination. So he must have come up with the idea that, okay, I'll invent something. And it actually ended up being an invention which is helping a lot of people. And it was a selfish motive. So is it really that bad to sort of follow something which actually does good for a lot of people? People who create, generate wealth are, ensuring that a lot of people are living their lives happily without even realizing that they're doing good.
No, it's not. It's this world. Yogananda said, he says we have to act, and well, the Gita says we have to act. You can't not act. And Yogananda said, if I'm going to live in this world, if you're going to live in this world, why don't you live in the world in the right way and do something good? Because we must, and there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with making wealth. This is perfectly fine. It's only the means by which we make that wealth that is sometimes questionable. But to be able to, it's actually quite important, I think, for people to act in a way that's beneficial to the world at large, to be able to make a good product, to be able to make something useful in life, to be able to build a beautiful highway, or to all of these are things that we all have to do. And we have a responsibility, so long as we are acting in this world and participating in it, to do it in an uplifting, positive way, in a way that serves other people. Where we find difficulty, what's happened, is if people lose sight of the more essential side as we're serving. But what's our motive in that service? Now, you can do good work. I mean, let's say if you build a hospital, that's a good thing. People are benefited by that. So that's good. But it's even better if you're building it with good motive, you see. If you do a good thing, it's in itself, it takes a certain amount of good karma comes from that. But even better would be to do it for proper motive.
So we can take one more question.
Good afternoon. Sir, though I went out, I was listening to your talk.
I'm going to have a hard time understanding that question.
I went out, but I was listening to your talk. The reason I came for this talk this morning, it says hope for a better world. Today we are living in a chaotic world. We are having children who are going hungry. Mass weapons, people in the world are threatening to use mass weapons of destruction. And we have seen Hiroshima. So, which better world? For individually, I can make my world better. I can withdraw myself from others. But we have to look at a very, very larger picture where innocent people are being killed and many children globally are going hungry. You also spoke about global warming and many things which are happening around us. And at materialism, and whatever we are doing in this world. Because it is not pertaining to one individual person who will only make money. Because if mass weapons would be used in this world, our money would be of no use. So how would you guide us as a society, as a globe, or a member of this society, a useful member of this society? How do we go about this? Thank you.
So let me, Gaurav, you were standing right there. You summarized for me, if I understand correctly. We look in the world today and we see so many negative things. The examples that you gave. How do we go about and actually do something about that?
That's correct.
She was saying that it's easy to, as an individual, to hope for a better world individually and to withdraw into ourselves. But when you see so much chaos outside,
Yes.
how do you reconcile?
What can we do? The question I ask myself oftentimes, I have heard people ask, we talk about some of the very terrible things that we see. We see it in our society, or we see it in perhaps other societies. And you wonder, what can one person do? How am I going to change global warming? And I can do my little part. I can save some energy here and there, but what can I do? And there's a certain reality to that I can recognize, because we have to recognize one person by themselves perhaps cannot solve these big problems. But if not one person, how do we start? We have to start somewhere. And we have to start by our own selves, putting into action in a positive way those ideals that we believe in. You have those fellows in Islamic State. They have ideals, but they're not putting them into action in a positive way. And you see this in violence, you see this in many different ways. You see that in people trying to affect social change through ways that are creating chaos. And that's not the answer. We have to find, but where do you begin? Now, many people, individual citizens, we don't control power, we don't manipulate the levers to affect things greatly, but yet we have to do what we can. There are people who do have more power than us, and we hope that we can change them as well. But you have to, don't become, I guess what I'm trying to tell you, don't become pessimistic, in the sense that it's hopeless. It is not hopeless, because we can do something, and even if it's just with ourselves, starting with ourselves to put our ideals into action. But I want to also say something also. If you look historically, you'll find that when change has happened in the world, and it does from time to time, radical change happens, it often starts with a few people who then influence a few others. And you look at, and if you see who were those people that were very influential, causing changes of consciousness, changes that people began to think differently, you find that those very great individuals, many times, not always, but many or even most times, there was a spiritual side to them. They were great spiritual leaders. They had the influence to be able to influence people. You look even in this country not very long ago, you look at Gandhi's life. One person. Now, if he, when he was in South Africa, had become discouraged, what can I possibly do? It wouldn't have happened, all that followed later, but he took action at that time. Now, this does not mean each of us need to go out and march up and down, the Main Street. Because it's not our dharma necessarily, but yet individually, we have to become an instrument for the ideals that we want to see the world embody. Because if we don't, what is our choice? Really, what is our choice? We have to start with ourselves and do our best. That will mean something different for you than it would for Gaurav, because you hold different different situations in life and different dharmas. But in time, you start with one person, two persons, 5, 10, 1,000. That change that starts with the small group of people ultimately reaches many. You have to be willing, I think too, if you're willing to work for change in your own life, I think you have to recognize that, or be willing to sacrifice. And unfortunately, not many people seem to be willing to sacrifice. I don't mean materially sacrifice. I mean sacrifice in the sense of your own will, ideas, to do something to change yourself demands to sacrifice the way you used to be. And that's a harder sacrifice. Many people will sacrifice the others. Swami, I'm going on.
We'll take one more question because the gentleman in front is really requesting, but due to the paucity of time, I urge you to have your questions asked privately to Jaya ji. He is available at the venue after this, so this is the last question.
I have to make this one short. I was going to get going there.
So, I'm sorry, it's not very well formed, the question. So, Kriya Yoga was taught to the Ananda Society through Babaji Mahamdar, who was a Siddha. And the way I see it, theosophy and
You have to hold the mic up, I can't hear you.
what association does the Ananda Society have directly with these mysterious things, occurrences, such as
To be short, I think the answer is none. I think what you would want to do is to I recommend that if you're interested in the deeper aspects of what we're sharing today, the aspects of Kriya Yoga, the aspects of perhaps Yogananda's teachings, I recommend you come to you can talk to Dityaji over here, and you come to the classes that we're going to be offering. And there are many little interesting, fantastical type things in there, but they're not central to anything of what we're teaching. They're just, like Yoganandaji would say, he's made reference to UFOs. Yoganandaji lived in the late 1940s when the UFOs started becoming popularized in there. And somebody asked him, what do you think of those things? And he said, oh, there's life on this universe is teeming with life. He says, we're not the only life forms in this universe. And he says, from that, he says, and if those UFOs are there, he says, yeah, he says, don't discount the possibility, because the life forms are throughout the universe. So, but for more of that, I'd say come to his class, and he'll answer every question you have. Okay.
Thank you very much, Jaya ji.